So. During our La Petite Roche Tricentennial, I will spend my year as Rotary President telling unique stories about our region's past 300 years. With our program today on the business of college athletics, I found it fitting to highlight the incredible ties Arkansans have to the business of professional sports, ironically, from a state that doesn't have any. Just last week, NFL owners unanimously approved the $4.65 billion sale of the Denver Broncos to Walmart heir Rob Walton and his daughter Carrie Walton Penner and son-in-law Greg Penner. It's the largest sports franchise transaction in our nation's history. The eldest son of Helen and Sam Walton, Rob is now the wealthiest owner in the NFL with an estimated net worth of $60 billion. Greg has served as chair of Walmart's board of directors since 2015. I'm sure you've all heard of that little company up in Northwest Arkansas. Another Arkansas native with ties to professional sports is Rob Walton's cousin, Ann Walton Kroenke, daughter of Bud Walton. She holds the franchise rights to the Denver Nuggets and the Colorado Avalanche. And her husband, Stan Kroenke, is owner of Kroenke Sports and Entertainment, the holding company for the Los Angeles Rams, Arsenal Football Club, and several other professional sports teams. Stan is from the small unincorporated town of about 24 residents of Mora, Missouri, 2 hours north of Springfield, where his dad ran the local lumber company. Of course, there's no love lost for him now in Missouri since he led the effort to relocate the St. Louis Rams to Los Angeles with the building of the nearly $5 billion SoFi Stadium. I bet many of you didn't know that John W. Henry, the principal owner of the Boston Liverpool Football Club, Pittsburgh Penguins, the Boston Globe, among others, spent part of his childhood in Arkansas. His parents were soybean farmers and split their time between Illinois and Arkansas. He got his start by trading corn and soybean futures, and this early learning led to his innovative trend reversal method of helping brokerage firms make investment decisions without human emotion. He applied similar data-driven techniques in sports when he incorporated the Moneyball tips with the Red Sox. For those of you unfamiliar with the movie, the Aaron Sorkin script featured John's character in a scene asking Billy Beane, played by Brad Pitt, to come to Boston to help the Red Sox win the World Series. Sorry, Tony. That's my New York Yankees fan back there. The late David Glass of Walmart lore was the 20-year owner of the Kansas City Royals, along with being CEO and interim chairman several years prior. He sold his interest in the team shortly before his death in early 2020. Former Clinton administration Secretary of Transportation Rodney Slater is one of the founding partners of the Washington Nationals. The Marietta native was our guest here at Rotary earlier this year and lived in Little Rock for several years. Today, he's a partner in the prestigious DC law firm Squire Patton Boggs. And of course, it's no secret that North Little Rock native Jerry Jones owns the Dallas Cowboys. You may recall this Rose City boy bought the struggling franchise in 1989 for $140 million. Quite a contrast from the Broncos purchase. Jerry, along with his wife Jean, son Stephen, and Jerry Jr. and Charlotte, their daughter, has increased the value of the Dallas Cowboys brand to what many estimate as the wealthiest in all of professional sports globally, just ahead of the New York Yankees and the New York Knicks. The master salesman got his early start as a young bow tie wearing boy who learned how to get tips as a greeter at his family's small grocery store, just a few miles from here on the other side of the river. His salesmanship is legendary. According to a 2020 Dallas Morning News article, his mom would give the young boy a wink when a known tipper entered his parents' grocery store. A subtle clue to push the customer's cart and collect the reward. While enrolled at the University of Arkansas, where he would join teammate Jimmy Johnson and assistant coach Barry Switzer on the university's lone football national championship team, the young student athlete sold insurance to businessmen in town, and he sold shoes to students in their fraternities while he was a student, while he was playing football. He owned a few oil wells, invested in a fast food chain, and he got rich in exploratory oil drilling, all before making his big move for the Cowboys. Over the years, this major disruptor of professional sports has added the luxurious $1.5 billion AT&T Stadium, what many call Jerry World, and its massive Jumbotron screens, its new star corporate headquarters in Frisco, a merchandising and licensing agreement with the NFL, investments in esports, a stadium management company, hospitality companies, real estate holdings, you name it. In fact, Forbes estimates the team value at $6.5 billion, with Jones' overall net worth at more than $10 billion. I'd say that's pretty good investment for a kid from Rose City. Now with the completed Bronco sale, the Walton family members have a controlling interest in every Denver sports franchise except the Colorado Rockies. And once you add in Jones' ownership of the Dallas Cowboys, it's safe to say a bunch of people from a state with no professional sports teams now own nearly 10% of all NFL teams, and many more from other leagues. I believe it proves once again that we Arkansans tend to punch a little bit above our weight class. And that's our illuminating the story for this week. And now I'd like for Micah Strother to introduce this week's special guest. And Micah, y'all may want to go. Okay, yeah, right there, perfect. And please introduce our guests on the panel for the business of college athletics, moderated by Rotarian Antoine Phillips. Micah.
Well, President Denver, thank you for that introduction of athletics in Arkansas. As we know, college athletics is a big business. I work for the Razorback Foundation, and the changing tide of college athletics is felt at the foundation as it is all over Arkansas. So I'm excited about this panel. First of all, we have the dynamic Antoine Phillips. Do you want him to come up as I introduce him? Okay. Antoine is one of our own. He is a Rotarian, a partner at Wright Lindsay Jennings, where he has been for over a decade and is a current city director. Specific to this conversation, he's a licensed NBPA player agent. For those that didn't know, that's the NBA player agent organization. And he is also represents college athletes, excuse me. We also have J.R. Carroll, who is an attorney with Kutak Rock. He represents public and privately held companies and currently represents a client in one of the largest antitrust cases in the U.S. That is not why he's here. He's here because he also is a licensed NFL and NBA agent and has represented first-round NFL draft picks in 2 of the last 4 years. Most recently, he represented Traylon Burks. Is that what I hear? Good job on that. And he currently represents KJ Jefferson. In case y'all haven't heard of him, he is our quarterback, and other Razorback athletes in NIL deals. And speaking of NIL, we've got Terry Prentice, who I'm pleased to introduce. Terry and I used to work together at the foundation before he spread his wings and did bigger and better things. He left us, he came back to Arkansas. He is currently the Senior Associate Athletics Director for Athlete Brand Development. And I hope he will get into the various things that he's developed to help our student athletes create their own business models for these NIL deals that they are receiving, because Arkansas is really held out there as the gold standard right now on what we're doing to prepare student athletes for running their own business, frankly. He also is the coordinator and implementer of diversity, equity, and inclusion action plans at the university. And then we have Steve Sullivan, who does not need an introduction, but I will introduce him. He's in his third decade of covering sports, beginning with a career when Lou Holtz was our coach, and even currently now on the sidelines of U of A games. He won the Sportscaster of the Year 13 times, lucky 13, and he's been inducted into the Arkansas Sportscasters and Sports Writers Hall of Fame. So we're in for a treat. Thanks, y'all.
Well, thank you. I understand the mics are already on, so you don't have to press anything, right? They knew we were going to get up here and start pressing things, JR, so they gave us a little notice ahead of time. Thank you, Micah, and thank Rotary President Denver Peacock for your vision and asking us to be a part of this panel to talk about something that Tyler and I were talking about earlier that we all love, which is sports and money, right? So that's what we're going to do today. And I guess I'll start at the end, kind of go in reverse order here. Start with you, Sully. I mean, you've been covering sports for 30 years. The conversation about paying college athletes has been around that whole time, I would assume. And so just from your perspective, what's changed and why now?
It seems odd that we'd go from, a point where we were trying to keep, not you, but the bad agents and the boosters out of the game. And now we've invited them back in. And I'm not a big proponent of paying players because we were, it wasn't that long ago, there was a big debate over cost of living, cost of attendance, where we pay the kids, what, $2,500 or $6,000.
And the money the athletes receive for those
athletes
costs.
are treated very well on campus. I mean, they get the amenities they have at their disposal as far as academics. Coach Pittman mentioned that everyone has graduated. Just physically, I mean, just all the resources they have. And I just, when I look at the paying the athletes, here's my main concern. I see some deals that, with the local car dealer, that's fine. But I can see rewarding players, but we get to enticing players. And who knows, there's zero transparency with NIL. And we don't know how much they're paying. And in politics and sports, there's no price they'll pay for power. And we've seen that regardless of the economy. And that's my concern. And you let the cat out of the bag now, and where's it going to go?
I can appreciate that, but as a person who was in politics and sports, I'm a little offended. Just FYI, teasing Sully. And the same question to you, JR, from the legal standpoint. You've been on this from the agent side for professionals and now with college athletes. What's your take on why it happened last summer with NIL deals?
The reason why it happened last summer was because the state of Arkansas and other states basically passed a law that said we're going to do NIL. And they also said, we're not going to do it till January 1st. NCAA, you've had your head in the sand for the last decade. Chris Bond and I were talking about it on the way, my drive down here. Skip Rutherford asked me to speak at the Clinton Lecture Series 8 years ago. And he said, just talk about whatever you want to talk about. And one of the three topics that I talked about was name, image, and likeness. And the fact that students were not getting paid 8 years ago, this was a topic that I thought was really important. And in part of that speech, I said, I have a 7-year-old son. Sometimes his favorite number is 1, sometimes his favorite number is 7. It's never been 86. But if you go to the University of Arkansas bookstore, the only jerseys they sell are 86. The best player on the team is Trey Flowers, he's 86. But the university does not use their name, image, and likeness to sell product. Just like if you went to the NCAA website and you typed in Johnny Manziel, the first thing that popped up on that search was you could purchase a Texas A&M #1 jersey. You didn't type in Texas A&M, you didn't type in football, you didn't type in jersey. But if you ask the NCAA, they don't use their name, image, and likeness to make a profit. And if we have any lawyers in the room, that's what we refer to as a smoking gun. And what brought this all to a head was a bunch of states, including Arkansas, said, NCAA, you've waited so long, we're going to give you 10 months, figure it out. But there was about 3 or 4 states, specifically Iowa, that said, we're not going to let you figure it out. we're done. We're tired. July 1, we're going to start having our athletes make money. Not only that, we've already got deals set up for them to basically work at fireworks stands on July 4th, and they're all going to make money. And if you don't like it, come to Iowa and sue us, NCAA. And so the NCAA on July 29th said, okay, we think now that all the players should be paid. It's our decision, not y'all's. And so by doing that and not setting up a structure and keeping their head in the sand, then it just became the wild, wild west. Now we have no rules. Now we have, to be honest, complete anarchy. And now you have everybody trying to figure out, where we're at in life. I mean, the most beautiful thing in the world is you have somebody like Nick Saban saying our quarterback is making close to $1 million in offers, which one is a falsity. Secondly, he then turns around and realizes that, wait a minute, there's other universities that can have more money than me. And for the first time in my life, I do not have a recruiting advantage. I think the great senator from Alabama, Tuberville, and my best friend, the senator from West Virginia, need to pass legislation to stop this, because Texas and Texas A&M, they have more money than me, and they can get better players than me. And because of that, we need now to have rules. And it's just amazing the power shift you see because of NIL.
And I appreciate that and agree with JR completely. And the other side of it is that other college athletes other college students were able to make money. But if you were an athlete, you had a restriction where you couldn't profit on whatever it is. So in some ways, this kind of evens the playing field for athletes throughout college. I mean, students throughout college, whether you're in athletes or not. So I definitely agree with that. You mentioned football. Everybody knows football is a big revenue producing sport. Terry, as someone at a university, we hear about the football deal. We hear about Nick Saban and Texas A&M. Can you give us some sense of whether other athletes in other sports are benefiting from NIL deals?
No, absolutely. And to Denver, appreciate you having me today, into the Rotary. It's always great to drive down, and I love driving around the state and spreading truths about name, image, likeness, because obviously when you tune in, listen to things on the radio, you see these reports, just a lot of misinformation out there. To agree with Sully that it's not as transparent because we don't have any kind of a national database. Every school uses a different kind of software to track name, image, likeness. Really, within even the Southeastern Conference, we don't all use a uniform method of tracking. So to that end, a lot of disinformation out there. So people wouldn't know that our softball program, all 27 young women on the softball program had a chance to work with Everett Buick GMC, which was a fantastic deal. It was a part of Buick's See Her Greatness campaign, a national campaign that afforded every single one of those Buick GMC dealerships to use their marketing budget to promote women's sports. So with Everett being a sponsor of the university and obviously, Miss Susie really enjoying the sport of softball herself, it led to a great opportunity for all the young women on the team while they were on their run to an SEC championship as well. So when you talk about name, image, and likeness, really capitalized and used it in the way that it was intended to do so. But men's basketball, Antoine, I know you represent Devo Davis, and he obviously did a fantastic job last summer, particularly here in Central Arkansas. And think about Guatney Chevrolet that he worked with. Now he's got First Arkansas Bank and Trust and the
Raising Cane's,
the Devoted Readers Program.
Yeah,
I mean, I think those things are fantastic and awesome. And Coach Muss does a great job with the marketing of our men's basketball program. So really the entire team's been able to take advantage of that. But, across the board, the women's basketball, track and field, volleyball, the UAMS has done quite a bit with our student athletes. So again, it's been department wide. We've had 224 student athletes take advantage of NIL year one. All 19 sports are represented. So it's been fun to watch.
And I'll give a shout out to the university. I do understand that there's not uniformity, and I'm sure JR can attest to this, but Arkansas, you particularly have really been leading the way and making sure that there is the structure that we can have and being responsive to deals. So thank you for the work that you do on behalf of the university, allowing people like JR and I to represent our clients. So thank you for that. Sully, back to you. Under Arkansas law, high school athletes can't really participate in NIL deals right now. For a person who covers high school sports, kind of give me your take on that kind of discrepancy between high school athletes not being able to do it, and then, once you cross that
I
threshold,
guess
you
Nick
can't.
Smith signed with Crunk Sports. Yeah.
Clutch Sports,
Clutch
but
Sports,
didn't
yeah.
do so until after the
Yeah.
AAA season, and
Yeah,
we really
Want to make sure that that's clear, right?
and the conversations, not to
Yeah.
take Sully's thunder, the conversations we
Yeah.
had with his family, I mean, they wanted to ensure they don't jeopardize North Little Rock's opportunity to win a championship, and so really important.
And basketball, especially, we have some high profile guys. I mean, every year. This past year, Nick Smith, Khalil Ware.
Yep.
And you hear rumors, and you hear, for the big players, they usually have people with them too. Representatives, not agents, but family or handlers. And you hear that we're the point now where there's get-in money for some athletes.
Yeah.
And if you want to play, you have to go to that level. And, I look at, and I think Arkansas is well positioned in this, and it's sad to say that, you have to have good NIL money. And I want to look at football, for example. Sam Pittman's had a lot of momentum. We won 9 games, but it's almost like we went from hunting with transfers in public land to private land. When we got a starting cornerback at Georgia, we got a second team linebacker at Alabama. We got 2 starters from LSU. You don't get that without a winning program and a strong NIL program. And that's where we're at. And what's going to happen is, if they don't, we have no rules, no guardrails. When people see what Arkansas is doing, they're going to try to find out how much they're paying, and they're going to try to pay more. And it's just going to get to the point where, we laugh at a movie like years ago, Blue Chips, where Ricky Rowe was getting his dad a tractor. And hey, we aren't far away. When they're paying these coaches, when Sam Pittman's the 9th highest paid coach, he's making $6 or $7 million. The more money you pay a coach, the more you're going to want to keep that job and do whatever you can to keep that job. And I just think, it's kind of a money grab right now.
We want them to keep the
coaches
job,
say they
though.
got their money, the players got their money, the TV networks got their money, and no one's really thinking about the good of the game. I do like the things you're doing with the NIL and getting the women involved and the Devo. There are some great stories with the NIL, but there's also that underlying, just the sad stories are going to be. And
I think that's the reality of the open market, if you will. And I appreciate that, Sully. So you mentioned a lot of different players in this process. There's also the businesses that are investing in these athletes, JR. So from your standpoint, why is it important? We got some business representatives, owners here. Why is it important for them to get in on this NIL deal to, reach out to players that you represent or even I represent? Just
I mean,
FYI.
well, I'll tell you this. I've represented some of the biggest corporations in the state and in the nation. And Sully, the time has passed for whether NIL is good or bad or indifferent. Yeah. And I will tell you this, the storm is here, and Arkansas can either get on board or not. And the university pretty much is handcuffed. And so it comes down to basically Arkansas corporations and Arkansas citizens. Do we want to engage in this battle? And if you do, I have told important people, what you need to do is you need to raise about $70 million. And what you need to do is you need to hire 2 people to go talk to these high school athletes and tell them, this is what, because the university can't do it. They're not allowed to. But if you don't think that the other universities are not doing this, you've lost your mind. You need to create an NIL endowment, just like Harvard has an endowment, just like every other university is going to create an endowment. You can call them collectives, you can call them whatever you want. But this is where 2022 sports is headed. Texas Tech has said that every player gets $25,000. They haven't said where it's coming from. They don't care.
On the football team, right?
Yeah. And that's the situation that we find ourselves that it's not the university's problem. It's the business leaders in Arkansas's problem. If we want to have a successful sports program, whether it's football, basketball, et cetera, it's now on our shoulders. And some businesses are directly tied to how well or how bad University of Arkansas does. Restaurants, hotels, tourism goes way up if we do well. It goes down if we don't. And so you can't really put a number on it. But that's the situation that we find ourselves in. Is I think that there needs to be a massive collective. I think you need to use the interest off the money that is raised to go after the best players, because quite honestly, all these athletes, they all are fairly, really smart, and to do the type of things that they have to do, to the time commitments that it takes, they're really intelligent, and they're not dumb. They know that about 1% are going to go professional. And so if there's money to be had, they have a 4-year period in which they can make it now based on their athletics. And so that's one of the reasons why Nick Saban hates NIL so much, is because he used to be able to hold up 8 championship rings and say, come to University of Alabama. Now Texas Tech can hold up $25,000 and say, come to Texas Tech. And
one thing for Terry, I just what you mentioned the money. How does this end 10 years from now when you're given a kid who has very little and you're going to throw hundreds of thousands of dollars at him? How's that preparing him for later in the life? I almost see it as a lottery winner. And how does that end up?
Yes, you'd really hope that, and we try to do this through our program, that the infrastructure is sound enough that there are real life skills that come with receiving those sums of money. So taxes being one thing. I know we've dealt with that with some student athletes over the course of the spring, but learning how to engage in a relationship with many of you all in this room, with business owners, learning what's appropriate on social media, learning, and I can't believe we are even discussing this over the course of this last week, but using your actual name on social media instead of some other kind of phrase alias makes it easier for people to engage with you and people to want to work with you and represent you. So I'd like to think in 10 years we'd be looking back at the programs that we built and had been teaching the things that we've had in place over the past 15 years in college athletics. But now with NIL and with money being involved, it seems as though our student athletes are starting to finally want to attend those workshops that that we'd hold at 7 p.m. on a night or at lunchtime.
Yeah, and again, the university's done a great job of trying to equip their athletes with that type of information. I also think, sadly, it's on people like JR and I who represent these athletes to help them transition into this new world, because every client that we have, we tell them, your first priority is school. Your second priority is whatever sport you play. And now you adding a third priority is that you are a business. You as an individual, you are a business. And there are things that come with that. And I think to your point, so there are some life skills that we're hoping help these folks develop, because if you don't have a JR or whoever helping you through this process, it can be daunting if you're 19 and you're dealing with all these different things. So definitely understand that. Switching gears a little bit, Terry, without getting into any specific details, I know a lot of people always want to know, how much money are these players making?
This gives an idea, ballpark.
Yeah, just general. If you could, whatever's comfortable for you.
So what I'd say, and I feel comfortable with, we've had student athletes accept things as small as gift cards, for food at a different restaurant. Gas cards have been given, things that help the student athlete with their day-to-day needs, that take a load off of their back or cut into maybe that cost of attendance check of $6,000 over the year that they're getting. Well, now maybe they can save some of that money and use some gift cards and other things for their living expenses, but thousands of dollars for autograph signings, tens of thousands of dollars, up to hundreds of thousands of dollars for some student athletes. Now, some of those opportunities may be in aggregate. So, 5, 10, 15 deals put together. Some might be just 2. Obviously, the higher profile student athletes are able to command more of that open market that's there. But yeah, we've really seen a little bit of everything. And it's not just been the men. We've had some female student athletes who are who have followers in the millions on TikTok and Instagram and other places. And most of their money is not even coming from businesses in Arkansas that are tied to sport. They're coming from clothing companies, sunglass companies, makeup companies. I mean, it's actually been outrageous to actually see this side of influencing, as we like to call it. But yeah, I would say everything in between. We've seen gift cards and free and all the way up to hundreds of thousands of dollars for student athletes.
And JR, if you want to chime in on that, I'll let you, but I also want to ask you a second question, because you kind of hinted at it when you talked about Nick Saban, but is NIL making the sports landscape more competitive, in your opinion?
It is. And the beautiful part about it is not to beat up on Nick Saban, but I will anyway.
We're Arkansas. We love to beat up on Nick Saban.
But like, Nick Saban gave a press conference and he said, my starting quarterback has close to $1 million in offers. Well, let's dissect that as an attorney. He's got 10 offers from a bank for $50,000 a piece. They're all exclusive offers. Once you take one of those $50,000 offers, $450,000 is wiped off the table. So it's easy for recruiting purposes to say, we've got $1 million in offers, but that's not really how much the player's making. And secondly, I've represented, Traylon Burks, Catalan. The most famous NIL person that makes like for dollar the most money is a kid named Sam Hurley. Has anybody ever heard of Sam Hurley? One person. Sully's heard of Sam Hurley. He's a kid from FHS, track guy, high jumper, decathlete. He's a freshman on the Texas track team. If you have teenage daughters, they would know of Sam Hurley. He has close to 10 million TikTok followers, over 1 million Instagram followers out of Fayetteville High School. He runs such a successful business that he went to FHS online because he was making high six figures dancing for 15 seconds at a time. I don't know why, but also the best part about it is he came into my life when he was about right before he turned 17, and he'd been doing this since he was 15. He knew all the analytics. He knew all the business factors. He knew like how much money, like he was like, I made 8% last month. And I'm thinking, there's a 16-year-old talking about how he made 8% last month. And so I think, Sully, to some of your fears, the sooner they get involved, the more that they'll actually get into it and understand it. And like, I honestly, I hear some of.
I've talked to a lot of those guys, and I don't know if I want to just give them like, $60,000 when they're freshmen and, see where they spend the money.
Well, I mean, but they've got to grow up at some point.
Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, it's hard to believe if I just even go back 4 or 5 years to not even think we're talking about this. And, and how, and I just don't view collectives as great. If you want to, I know it's a reality, but if you want to put the NIL at its truest sense would be, you get paid for your doing something. Devo Davis at a Jacksonville auto dealership, where this is just, loading up a bunch of money to buy a wide receiver.
Well,
I just don't.
I'll put it this way. On most NIL deals, you're really big athletes. None of them are going to touch six figures. They're going to make good money, but it's not going to be money that they can, live their whole life on. And with Traylon Burks, he was in a different category than everybody else. We turned down probably every 15 deals for every one deal we did. And it was hard for Traylon because it was brand new and he saw his other teammates doing these deals. And I kept telling him no when all he wanted to say was yes. And I came up with a mantra for Traylon, which was, we don't trip over pennies chasing dollars. You have a chance to be a first round pick. Those are millions of dollars. Why are we going to take away time from $1 million goal, making $4,000 for someone? And he finally got it. And he really appreciated it. The problem is most athletes at most schools, whether it's Arkansas, even Alabama, they're not going to go pro. The only time that they have to earn money off the fact that they play a professional college sport is that 4-year window.
while they're in college. And I agree with you, and I think that's an important point, JR, that we hear all the news about the deals that are made. There's a lot more with good guidance that are not made. And we do the same thing with our athletes and making sure that it's the right deal and it's not compromising your ability to do the first two things well, which is school and the sport. You don't want to get so busy making money that you're late for practice. And then what repercussions does that have? And if you're not playing, then that has a domino effect. So I think that's a very important point to make. Terry, Sully and JR kind of mentioned to this wild west as we are in the NIL space. What do you see happening for us? Are we going to get tighter regulations or is it still going to be kind of ad hoc from state to state and university to university?
So it certainly feels like it's going to be more ad hoc, state to state. I don't think this Congress has the appetite to tackle name, image, and likeness. I think there are far more pressing things going on in this country. No, Nick Saban obviously reached out to Tommy Tuberville and Joe Manchin, wanting them to put some kind of a bill package together. But again, don't think that there's an appetite for that at this time. So for the time being, I think state laws are going to supersede anything that the NCAA puts out. NCAA is afraid of litigation, so they're afraid of being taken to task. And last summer, the reason we're here, it was also because of the loss that the NCAA took in the Supreme Court, 9-0, in the Alston case, which for those that don't know was a case that capped athlete compensation from an academic standpoint. And that's why we are today, in addition to the state laws. So I think we're just going to see things continue as they are for the time being. The only other major shift or change I could see in college sports are student athletes being employees. That's certainly something we're paying attention to. There are cases going on out in California, up in Pennsylvania, that are challenging the nature of what amateurism actually is. So I could see some quasi semi-pro type of setup with college athletes in the future. But for the time being, it's just going to be the traditional NIL that Sully's touched on, and these collectives, or whatever you want to call them, they're not going to go away. And we have to make sure that we have what we need in Arkansas so we can still compete in the SEC at the end of the day.
All right, absolutely. And we can keep it going, but with the permission of the president, if there are any questions, I will be happy to take a question or two. I saw Andrew, you want to go first, stand up?
Some folks in here now, I'm a graduate at SMU in Dallas from the mid-1980s. I guess we're just visionaries about that. Very good.
Ahead of your time, right?
There's got to be some locker room jealousies among teammates. Arch Manning in Texas is going to win millions of dollars. His left guard is exhausted in the fourth quarter trying to block. If he gets nothing, that's not going to cause some problem.
So I'll repeat the question just so everyone can hear it. I guess you're asking for a response on the possible differences in the locker room and compensation. Some athletes are going to make substantial amount of money. Some may not make anything. Some may just be getting a gift card. So I just open it up to the panel, whoever want to respond. Any thoughts?
We should ask the Razorback punter, because he went on Twitter asking people to DM for him for NIL opportunities. but I don't know. It's just human life. If you see a guy, if he's not producing, that's the problem. If it's a guy like Traylon Burks and he's Traylon Burks, he's been better than you since 8th grade. He's got treated differently in high school. He's getting treated differently in college. But if it's a guy who comes in and you've paid him a lot of money and, he's not producing and you come up and you do something special and you're feeling, why am I not getting paid?
Yeah, it's difficult in that. One thing I'll give Coach Pittman credit for, he's been very consistent with the way he's treated the locker room as it's related to NIL, not wanting to engage in the collectives and everybody making $35,000 in the entire locker room. I mean, if we really break it down, the 85 football players that are on full scholarship, receiving room, board, tuition, books, and fees. We just passed the Alston payments this past year, so that's $59.80 on top of that a year. You get $6,000 a year from a
Add that up. What is the total value of a yearly of a scholarship
really
athlete?
it's close to $60,000 a year, not including unlimited training tables. So our student athletes, including walk-ons, receiving 3 meals a day, also receive a thing we call Red Card that allows you to go out in the community, spend $15 a day on a different meal. So you start adding it up, everyone in the locker room is receiving that. And now we have this thing called NIL. And I know from professional experience, in the NFL, NIL's been around for, forever. But you've got players, professional players that are on salary. I think now there's just going to be this market correction where I think student athletes are just going to have to figure out what that means. Because I'll tell you, in baseball and track and field and some other sports, it's always been that way. And that there's somebody that you might be better than or producing more than that's on something a little different. So to that end, I think there's just going to be this course correction and players are going to start figuring it out.
You want to add anything to that, JR?
I would just simply say that it's just the NFL's coming to them to colleges sooner. In the NFL, you've got a hard salary cap, which means if you go over that dollar amount, they void the contract. And so you have 53 people on a roster. Most likely 30 of those to 35 of those players are on a minimum wage contract. And so you're going to have one person.
NFL minimum wage is pretty high though, just in case anybody's wondering.
But still, what you have is you could have a lineman that is playing for $900,000 a year, and he's asked to protect somebody that's making $40 million a year. And not only that, he has people that are gouging his eyes, gouging his throat, doing whatever they can. And if they get even remotely close to the pretty little quarterback, somebody throws a flag. And so you have to adjust to that in the locker room that there's going to be severe haves and have-nots. And for the most part, what I've seen with the college athletes with the NIL is they get it. I mean, that's why I've often represented more linemen than anybody else, is because they've never been famous. And so they don't come to me, with a diva attitude, because no one's ever thought that they were special. And so that just carries through in the locker room.
Good question. I think we had one over here too. Go ahead, Jim.
Anymore for that purpose. And then secondly, what about the people, as Andrew said, that were ahead of their times, coaches that visit the prison or agents who visit the prison, should they be released and
repeat the question. So two-part. One, does the NCAA still have the investigative purposes that it used to have as it relates to controlling improper benefits to athletes? And then secondly, what about those who've been punished for crossing that line before 2021? I'll speak to the second one, then open the panel up to the first one. As it relates to the second one, we see this in a lot of different areas. I mean, marijuana as well. Like, even though we changed the law, there hasn't been an appetite. That's a buzzword in Arkansas these days. Hasn't been an appetite to go back and course correct those who've violated a rule that's no longer a rule. So I don't think we'll see that change in this respect either. But as it relates to the first question, is the NCAA still going to investigate people for making impermissible benefits? And it's probably best to start with you, Terry.
Yeah, so I think the enforcement division of the NCAA, they're still going to be around in some fashion. I think the rule book's becoming thinner and thinner, thankfully, because there are a lot of antiquated rules on the books before, but there still are cases of academic misconduct. There still are cases of extra benefits for, high school players. Thankfully, they just changed some bylaws last week. We can now give players a ride if they need to be able to go somewhere. We used to not be able to do that, even current staff.
They got their own rides now.
Yeah, true. Well, not all of them. Clearly, not all of them. So yeah, I think the enforcement division will still be around in some respect, but their purpose surely coming away with NIL being around, because we can find ways to be creative with NIL for a lot of those extra benefits that had been around previously, as long as things are documented and the athlete does something in exchange for what they're receiving.
The NIL is good for schools like Arkansas and Ole Miss, because Alabama is going to be good every year. This gives us a chance through transfer rules and NIL, where this year we picked up 9 guys that are going to play prominent roles in this team, major holes that we wouldn't have the year we're anticipating to have if it wasn't for the current circumstances. And Ole Miss, I think, has 19 new players, where it's and that's why Alabama's complaining,
Right.
because they wouldn't lose their second team linebacker to us if we didn't have a nice NIL deal and a place for him to play.
Yeah, you're right. There are new opportunities, and people are taking advantage of those. I think we had one here, and then we'll go here if we have enough time.
Okay, thanks, guys. And JR, I'm now following Sam Hurley. Thank you. For my Instagram page.
He appreciates that.
Question is probably more for Terry. You know, I own an agency where we hire influencers, and it does worry me a little bit thinking about young people making such big decisions, even just for the rest of their lives. Like, you know, you take on a deal, you represent a company, and it may not be what you thought, and then it affects you later on. So can you tell us about some more of the, you know, business and advice you're giving to those students, especially if they don't have an attorney or an agent? Are they able to go to you, and that's what they get with you guys?
So the question is, does the school, I guess in this case, University of Arkansas, provide business resources for athletes who don't have professional representation?
So we do. And one of the first things we do with just about all of the student athletes, though, is try to encourage them to find representation, particularly the higher profile the student athlete becomes, and that they're going to have real opportunities. They need to have someone that's skilled and licensed, obviously, to look, read, review contracts and those terms. But my role and the role of my staff, we try to just be mentors and have a relationship with the student athletes. We're at practices. We're officed out of the Jones Student Athlete Center. We eat lunch around them. We're at practices, like as I mentioned. And so we try to just give great general advice, but you'd be surprised as to the parents' involvement. Grandparents or whoever might be around the student athlete, that they're pretty in tune and wanting to make sure that their son or daughter doesn't misstep. But we've had to have some, tougher learning moments with some student athletes on maybe them rushing into a deal too quickly. I could think of some student athletes who didn't have Antoine's advice on the front end. He got a hold of them on the back end and was able to clean them up. Same goes for JR. And so, yeah, we've had those conversations. And for what it's worth, JR didn't mention this. I am the track and field sport administrator. And so Sam not coming to Arkansas had nothing to do with NIL. I've known him since he was 10 years old. It had nothing to do with name, image, and likeness. He wanted to go to that big city and had that opportunity. Been in Arkansas his whole life.
Good. Look, got time for one more question, Robert. Okay, Michael.
Well, I should have said it in his introduction, and Terry's too modest to say it, but Terry was a student athlete in the track and field program at the university, which I think brings a different perspective to how well we can mentor our current student athletes. He's been exactly in their role without the NIL, and now has a successful career that he can explain the path forward to. So I want to mention that.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael gave Terry much deserved shout out as a former track and field star at the university. Definitely has a perspective that he understands where the athletes are coming from. One final question, Robert.
There's a couple of us in here that are Vanderbilt fans and Vanderbilt graduates. Is there any potential for NIL to lift us up? And I'm strictly talking about football. Everybody knows we had 2 College World Series in the last 10 years. Does NIL have the potential for lifting the Vanderbilts, the Missouris, the South Carolinas out of the cellar?
Just to repeat the question real quickly, and obviously we run out of time since Denver is standing beside me now. But does NIL allow for lower performing SEC football schools opportunity to maybe jump into that top tier?
I would say it's tough. Now, you all have benefited from the Vanderbilt scholarship rule that you quietly don't want anybody in this room to know about, which is why you have your baseball team is as good as it is, because you have an extreme financial advantage there. I think that where NIL will help teams quickly is in basketball, because as Terry said, you have 85 people on a football scholarship. And if you can get a really good quarterback or a really good running back, that may be able to change your perspective. But if you get 3 really good basketball players, you can end up in the Final Four. You don't need 13, you don't need 8, you don't really need 9. You get 3 really good basketball players and you can change the direction of your program completely.
Anyone want to add that before we turn it back over to Denver?
No, I just add that I think what Sully had said certainly helping us. We were licking our chops with NIL coming around, knowing that we could pick up transfers from some other places and that it takes both sides of the ball. So you've got to win in this league in the trenches, the offensive side, the defensive side. And so if you could pick some of those players up, I think that's where you have an opportunity. So the endowment that Jared was talking about probably would be beneficial.
And Sully is a Razorback homer, so he doesn't hope you get any better. Right, Sully?
Right, that's right. I think Vandy's days are over.
All right. Hey, thanks, everybody. We really appreciate you being here today. Antoine, thanks for moderating. JR, Terry, Sully, thank you very much. Y'all hang on one second. I'm going to give you your speaker gift. But before I do that, I've been reminded that the only Little Rock owner of a professional sports team is a 67 Catholic high grad. I'd forgotten about that. Dr. John York, who married to the DePatarlo, I'm saying that wrong, DePatarlo family out of San Francisco 49ers. So anyway, he's a Hillcrest boy, grew up here, and wanted to be sure I mentioned that before the program's over. We do have speaker gifts this year during our tricentennial. We are donating books.
Include the moderator?
We'll get you one. You're a Rotarian. You're already a Rotarian. We have books that we're doing this year in honor of our signature literacy focus. These books are giving to you, but they are a sample of the Little Rock Connected author books that we're going to be giving to our area elementary schools and resource center libraries. So we wanted you to have them as our thank you for being here today. At the end of the year, your name will be on a list that's submitted to those libraries. So thank you very much. We also have a tricentennial pin for each of you. And if you'll stick around and get a photo, we would appreciate that. This one happens to be signed by Chelsea Clinton, whose dad's building is here. Next week, our friends from France will bring us our annual program. We're very excited about that. So please make plans to join us next Tuesday here at the Clinton Library. We are adjourned.